The snow crunched beneath my worn boots as I stood at the massive oak door, clutching the small wrapped package against my chest like a shield. My breath formed clouds in the December air, and through the frosted glass panels, I could see silhouettes moving in elegant clothes, hear laughter spilling out like champagne from a bottle I'd never be invited to open. I hesitated. My reflection stared back at me from the dark glass, a 62-year-old woman in a second-hand coat hair, graying at the temples, hands rough from years of substitute teaching, and too many nights choosing between heat and food. This wasn't how I'd imagined my life would look at this age. 3 years ago, I would have been inside that house, greeting guests, refilling glasses, laughing at jokes I didn't quite understand, but pretended to find amusing because that's what mothers do. 3 years ago, before I sold everything. The doorbell's chime echoed inside, and my heart hammered against my ribs. Through the glass, I watched a figure approach, tall, elegant, moving with the confidence that comes from success and expensive clothes. The door swung open, and there stood my daughter Laura, radiant in a red cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair swept up in an elaborate style I'd never seen before. Her smile froze when she saw me. Not disappeared, froze, like someone had pressed pause on a video just as the expression was forming, leaving it hanging there incomplete and unconvincing. "Mom," her voice carried confusion rather than welcome, the single syllable hanging between us like an accusation. "What are you doing here?" The question hit me like a slap. Not "Mom, I'm so glad you came." Not "Come in, it's freezing out there." Just "What are you doing here?" as if I were a door-to-door salesman who'd shown up at the wrong address. "I brought a Christmas gift," I said, extending the package with hands that suddenly felt too large, too clumsy. The wrapping paper, recycled from last year's birthday, carefully smoothed and reused, looked shabby in the glow of the crystal chandelier behind her. "I thought maybe I could join you all for a bit. It's been so long since we've—" "Mom." Laura stepped outside, pulling the door partially closed behind her. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but the chill in her eyes was worse. Much worse. "This is a private event." Those 4 words. A private event. I felt something crack inside my chest, a sound only I could hear. "Private, important clients are here. Brandon and Sophie, too. It's not a good time." She glanced back through the door nervously, as if afraid someone might see us. Might see me. "You should have called first." I stared at my daughter, this woman I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through colic and nightmares, worked double shifts to afford her ballet lessons and braces. I'd sold our family home to give her the capital to start her boutique, the house where I'd raised her after her father died, leaving us with nothing but debt and a mortgage we couldn't afford. I'd given her $150,000 and asked for nothing in return, except the promise that we'd always have each other. "I did call," I said quietly. 5 times last week. No one answered. Laura's face flushed. "We've been busy, Mom. The holiday season is crazy for retail, you know that. Maybe we can have lunch next week. I'll call you." But we both knew she wouldn't. Just as she hadn't returned my calls for the past 3 months. Just as she'd forgotten my birthday in October. Just as she'd been too swamped to visit when I'd mentioned the leak in my ceiling that had turned my tiny room above Mrs. Peterson's garage into a symphony of dripping water and mildew. "Are Brandon and Sophie inside?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "You said they're here." "Yes, but so all 3 of my children are here together for a Christmas party, and no one thought to mention it to me." The words came out harder than I'd intended, each one sharp enough to cut. "When did this event get planned, Laura?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's been on the calendar for months. It's networking, Mom. Business. Not really a family thing." "I'm not family. That's not what I meant." But her hand was already on the door, already pushing it further closed, already erasing me. "You're dressed in... I mean, the guests are all..." She trailed off, but I understood perfectly. I wasn't dressed appropriately. I didn't fit their image. I was an embarrassment. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for 3 years, accommodating and excusing and understanding, finally broke. Not with a bang, but with a whisper like the last thread in a frayed rope giving way. I looked past Laura into the warm, glittering room beyond. Through another doorway, I glimpsed Brandon, my oldest, standing with a group of people in expensive suits, a champagne glass in his hand, throwing his head back in laughter. And there, arranging canapes on a silver platter, was Sophie, my youngest, in a designer dress I'd seen featured in a magazine at the grocery store checkout line, 800 marked down from 1-200. They were all here. All together, and I hadn't even been told. What I did next was not planned. It wasn't calculated for effect or designed to teach a lesson. It was simply the action of a woman who had finally reached her limit. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and gently but firmly pushed past Laura into the warmth of the house. "Mom!" Laura's hiss carried more panic than anger. "You can't just—" "But I could, and I did." The conversation stuttered to a halt as heads turned toward me. It happened in waves. The people nearest the door, first, their eyes widening slightly, then those by the fireplace, their laughter trailing off into awkward silence, and finally those in the adjacent dining room, craning their necks to see what had caused the sudden quiet. The room fell silent, save for the soft Christmas music playing in the background, Bing Crosby crooning about a white Christmas that felt nothing like the cold rejection I'd just experienced. I stood there in my worn coat, clutching my small gift wrapped in recycled paper and salvaged ribbon, facing a room full of strangers and the 3 children I had given everything to save. My fingers trembled, but I forced my chin up, forced my spine straight, forced myself to remember that I had every right to be here. This was my daughter's house, yes, but it had been built on the foundation of my sacrifice. Laura appeared at my side, her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Everyone," she said, her voice brittle with forced cheer, "this is my mother, Isabel Morrison. She just stopped by unexpectedly." The way she said unexpectedly carried a weight of apology, as if she were explaining away a stray dog that had wandered in from the street. I placed the package on a nearby console table with care, then slowly unbuttoned my coat. The gesture felt both defiant and vulnerable, like removing armor while standing on a battlefield. When I spoke, my voice carried to every corner of the suddenly silent room, clear and calm, in a way that surprised even me. "Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm Isabel Morrison, Laura Brandon, and Sophie's mother." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched my 3 children freeze in place, Laura beside me with her hand half raised as if to stop me. Brandon across the room with his champagne glass suspended midway to his lips, Sophie by the dining room doorway with a serving platter gripped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. And in their eyes I saw something I had never expected to see. Shame. But before anyone could speak, before Laura could rush me back out the door, or Brandon could smooth things over with his practiced charm, a distinguished gentleman stepped forward from the crowd. He was perhaps 68, with silver hair that caught the light, wearing an expensive suit that spoke of old money and good taste. His eyes, kind but penetrating, found mine and held them. "Isabel Morrison," he asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. "The Isabel Morrison who taught English at Westridge High." I blinked, taken aback. "Yes, that's me. I taught there for 25 years. His face broke into a warm smile that transformed his features, chasing away the formality. "Mrs. Morrison, you probably don't remember me. I'm William Harmon. You taught my son Tyler back in 2003. The name sparked a memory. A lanky teenager with dyslexia who'd struggled with reading comprehension, who'd stayed after school with me 3 days a week, who'd cried when he finally read an entire chapter book on his own. "I remember Tyler," I said softly. Sweet boy. He had such determination once we found the right approach. William's eyes glistened. He turned to address the room, his voice carrying authority and emotion in equal measure. "This woman saved my son's future. Tyler had severe dyslexia and the school wanted to hold him back, maybe even recommend special placement. Mrs. Morrison stayed after school 3 days a week for an entire year. No extra pay, no recognition. She developed a completely custom teaching method just for him." He paused, and in that moment I felt the weight of every eye in the room shift from curiosity to interest. "Tyler is now the special education coordinator for the entire district. He helps hundreds of kids every year, kids just like he was, kids who learn differently, who need someone to believe in them." William's voice thickened with emotion. "And he credits this woman with changing his life." I felt my cheeks flush. "I just did what any good teacher would do." "No." William shook his head firmly. "You did what an exceptional teacher does. You saw a child, not a problem. You saw potential, not limitation." He turned to look at Laura, whose face had drained of color. "I had no idea you were related to the Isabel Morrison. You've never mentioned your mother's work. In fact," he paused, confusion crossing his features, "you've never mentioned your mother at all." The room remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the shocked quiet of an unexpected interruption, but the weighted silence of people sensing a story, sensing drama, sensing that something significant was unfolding before them. Laura's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Beside me, I could feel her panic radiating like heat from a furnace. "Mr. Harmon," she finally managed, "I didn't realize you knew my mother. I mean, I knew she taught, of course, but I didn't know that you—" She trailed off, floundering. "Know her?" William laughed, though there was an edge to it now. "Your mother is something of a legend among parents at Westridge. After Tyler succeeded, I started hearing stories from other families. The single mother who stayed until 7 every night to help struggling students. The teacher who used her own money to buy books for kids whose families couldn't afford them. The woman who organized the district's first inclusive learning program." He looked back at me with something approaching reverence. "There's even a scholarship in your name now, Isabel. The Morrison Teaching Excellence Award. $10,000 annually to educators who demonstrate innovative approaches to diverse learners." My heart stuttered. There's a scholarship in my name." "You didn't know?" William's surprise seemed genuine. "It was established 4 years ago by the Parents Association. We tried to contact you for the dedication ceremony, but—" He left the sentence hanging, but his eyes had shifted to my children, to Brandon, who'd moved closer, setting down his champagne glass with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet room, to Sophie, who'd frozen with her serving platter still in hand, tears beginning to track through her carefully applied mascara, to Laura, whose face had gone from flushed to pale in the span of seconds. A woman across the room, elegant perhaps in her 50s with kind eyes, cleared her throat. "Isabel Morrison, are you the same Isabel Morrison who wrote those incredible teaching essays for the Educators Quarterly? I used to read them to my daughter. They inspired her to become a teacher herself." Before I could answer, a man near the fireplace spoke up. "Wait, didn't you lead that fundraising campaign for the Children's Library after the fire in 2010? My company donated because of your speech at the town hall. It was remarkable. You had half the room in tears." "That was you." Another voice, this one from a younger woman near the dining room. "My mother still talks about that speech. She says it changed how she thought about community responsibility." One by one, people in the room began to recognize me. Not as my children's embarrassing mother in the shabby coat, but as someone who had touched lives, who had made a difference, who had mattered in ways that had nothing to do with retail boutiques or trendy restaurants or freelance design work. With each new revelation, with each memory shared and contribution acknowledged, I watched my children seem to shrink further into themselves. Laura's perfect posture crumbled. Brandon's confident smile faded to a tight grimace. Sophie openly cried, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivulets. William still held my attention, his eyes searching my face. "Isabel, I'm on the board at Westridge. That scholarship I mentioned, it comes with something else, something we've been trying to offer you for months now." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "The Westridge Legacy Award. It's given annually to one educator who has demonstrated exceptional long-term impact on the community. It comes with a $50,000 grant." He paused, glancing at my children with something that looked like disappointment. "We announced it 4 months ago. When we couldn't reach you directly, we contacted your family." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The implications of what William was saying crashed over me in waves, each one colder than the last. $50,000. 4 months ago. Contacted my family. We were told, William continued carefully, his eyes never leaving my children's faces, that you were traveling abroad indefinitely, that you decided to take an extended vacation and couldn't be reached for the award ceremony. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked. Someone's glass clinked against a table. And in the silence, I heard the sound of my world reshaping itself of truth, forcing its way through years of carefully constructed lies. "I haven't traveled anywhere," I said quietly, each word falling into the silence like a stone into still water. "I've been living in a room above Mrs. Peterson's garage for the past 18 months. A ripple of whispers spread through the room. "I work as a substitute teacher," I continued, my voice gaining strength even as my hands began to tremble. $80 a day, 2 or 3 days a week when I'm lucky. My pension is $1,200 a month. I pay $400 in rent because Mrs. Peterson was kind enough to reduce it when she saw I was struggling to make ends meet." Laura's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Mom, I haven't been on vacation," I said, still speaking to William, but aware that every person in the room was listening. I've been screening my calls because I kept getting numbers I didn't recognize, and my children told me they were probably scammers. They offered to collect my mail to make things easier when I first moved into the garage room. I thought they were being helpful. The pieces were falling into place now, clicking together like a puzzle I'd been too close to see. The mysterious calls that came when my children happened to be visiting. The mail they'd offered to organize for me. The way they'd discouraged me from answering unknown numbers, from checking my email regularly, from staying too connected to my old life at Westridge. You intercepted the award, I said, not as a question but as a statement, looking at Laura. All of you. You knew about it and you kept it from me. Sophie made a sound, half sob, half gasp. Mom, we can explain. I'm sure you can. My voice was quiet now, dangerously so. Just like you can explain why Brandon drove a Porsche to the Maldives last spring while I was choosing between heating oil and groceries. Just like Laura can explain the Mercedes parked in the driveway, the one that appeared 6 months after I gave her $150,000 to invest in her boutique. Just like Sophie can explain the designer wardrobe when I haven't been able to afford a new coat in 3 years. The silence in the room was suffocating now. I could feel the weight of judgment shifting, could see it in the faces around me. Curiosity transforming into understanding. Understanding transforming into disapproval. These were Laura's clients, Brandon's investors, Sophie's professional contacts. And they were watching my children's carefully constructed images crumble in real time. William's voice when he spoke was gentle but firm. Isabel, regardless of what's happened here tonight, the job offer still stands. We want you heading up our new educational outreach program. Full-time position, $85,000 a year, benefits, pension contribution, and an office at the school. $85,000. More than I'd made in my best year of teaching. More than enough to never worry about heating oil again, to never choose between doctor visits and groceries, to never feel that sick panic when an unexpected bill arrived. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. I would be honored to discuss it with you. Excellent. William reached into his jacket pocket and extracted a business card, pressing it into my hand with warmth. Call me tomorrow. We'll set up a proper meeting. This is long overdue. A heavy silence settled over the room as William stepped back. All eyes remained fixed on my children, on Laura, whose professional composure had shattered, on Brandon, who stood rigid with his jaw clenched, on Sophie, who looked like she might collapse. Laura moved first, her hostess instincts kicking in despite the catastrophe unfolding around her. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice tight but controlled, why don't we all move to the dining room? Dinner is about to be served. She gestured toward the archway, and the crowd, still buzzing with whispers and exchanged glances, began to move in that direction. But slowly, reluctantly, like people leaving a theater before the final act. When the last guest had drifted toward the dining room, I turned to face my 3 children. They stood scattered across the living room like chess pieces abandoned mid-game, each one wearing a different mask of guilt and fear and desperate calculation. Laura spoke first, attempting to regain control of the situation the way she controlled everything else in her life, with careful strategy and firm direction. Mom, this isn't what it looks like. Then what is it? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. Because it looks like you've been hiding opportunities from me. It looks like you've been lying to people about me. It looks like my own children have been sabotaging my life. Brandon squared his shoulders, his jaw tight. He'd always been the defensive one, the child who'd learned early that a good offense was better than any defense. We were protecting you. The word hit me like a physical blow. Protecting me from what, from stress. His voice carried that edge of righteousness that had always made me want to shake him. From responsibility. You're 62, Mom. After everything you went through with Dad, the medical bills, the debt, the stress of working yourself to exhaustion, you deserve to rest. Rest, I echoed, and I heard something dangerous creeping into my voice. Something I'd kept locked away for so long I'd almost forgotten it existed. You think living in a garage room, counting pennies to make rent, working substitute teaching jobs at my age, you think that's rest? Sophie wiped her eyes, mascara smearing across her cheeks. She'd always been the emotional one, the one whose tears could usually soften my anger. We were going to tell you about the award, she said, her voice breaking. We thought. You thought what? I demanded, my patience finally truly spent. You thought you'd steal it. You thought you'd decide what was best for me without consulting me. You thought. We thought the money would be better used investing in businesses that could eventually support all of us. Laura cut in, ever the pragmatist. Including you, Mom. Long-term security instead of a one-time payment. And there it was. The truth laid bare, brutal and simple. They had taken what was meant for me, money that recognized my life's work, that honored my contributions, that could have changed everything for me, and they'd decided it belonged to them. The same way you invested the money from selling my house, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet now. A flash of guilt crossed their faces, confirming what I had begun to suspect over these past 18 months. The money I'd given them, $150,000 to each of them, split equally from the sale of the home their father and I had worked our entire lives to pay for. It hadn't all gone to their businesses, I remembered now. The timeline I'd tried not to think about. Laura's Mercedes gleaming in the driveway, arriving just 3 months after I'd handed her the check. Brandon's Instagram posts from the Maldives, lounging on a private beach, sipping cocktails that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, appearing just 4 months after he'd taken his share. Sophie's new wardrobe, the designer pieces she'd casually mentioned buying, the jewelry I'd glimpsed in her social media photos, all of it appearing within half a year of receiving her investment capital. Where did the money go? I demanded, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. All of it. I want to know right now. Brandon's face hardened, that defensive wall going up again. This isn't the time or place for this conversation. It's exactly the time, I countered, feeling something wild and powerful unfurling in my chest. Because I'm done waiting for you three to remember I exist. I'm done being pushed aside and forgotten. I'm done sacrificing everything while getting nothing, not even basic respect in return. I reached into my coat pocket, feeling the edge of William's business card, its presence a reminder that I had options now, that I wasn't powerless anymore. Tomorrow, I said. I'm calling William. I'm accepting that job. I'm claiming that award money with interest if I have to get lawyers involved. And then I'm going to make some changes in my life, starting with how I allow my own children to treat me. Laura's eyes narrowed, her business instincts sensing a threat. What is that supposed to mean? I met her gaze steadily, this daughter I'd carried and nursed, and raised this woman I barely recognized. It means I'm done being invisible. It means I'm done being convenient. It means you three have a choice to make about what kind of relationship you want with me going forward. But it will be on my terms, now, not yours. Just then the dining room doors swung open and a young server appeared, looking nervous. Ms. Morrison, your guests are waiting. Should I serve the first course? Laura looked torn, her eyes darting between the dining room where her carefully curated guests waited and the family crisis unfolding in her living room. Her entire event, months of planning important connections, potential business deals, all of it hanging in the balance. Yes, she said finally, her voice tight. Please do. We'll be right there. After the server disappeared, she turned back to me, her voice low and urgent. Mom, please, can we discuss this tomorrow? My entire future depends on how tonight goes. These connections, these relationships. I looked at my daughter, beautiful and accomplished and utterly self-absorbed, and felt a strange mixture of love and disappointment that only a mother can know. Your future has always been more important to me than my own, Laura, I said softly. That ends tonight. With that, I turned toward the dining room where the party guests waited. But as I reached the doorway, I paused and looked back at my children, at these 3 adults I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for. By the way, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, that gift I brought, the one I left on the console table. All 3 pairs of eyes turned to the small wrapped package. It's a copy of the deed to the family home. I found a way to buy it back 6 months ago with help from Mrs. Peterson. She had the capital. I have the determination and a payment plan. I paused, watching shock bloom on their faces. I was going to sign it over to the 3 of you tonight as a Christmas gift, a way of saying that despite everything, despite the distance that had grown between us, you were still my family. You still mattered. The silence was absolute. Now I'm not so sure, I finished quietly. Their shocked faces told me they hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected me to have resources plans options. They'd underestimated me for the last time. What they didn't know, what I wasn't ready to tell them yet, was that I had one more surprise in store. One that would force them to face not only what they had done to me, but what they had become in the process. As I walked into the dining room with my head held high, I could hear them following behind me, whispering urgently to each other. I could feel their panic, their desperation to regain control of a situation that had spun wildly away from them. But whatever plan they were hatching, whatever strategy they were cobbling together, it was too late. The truth was already unraveling thread by thread. And by the end of this night, everyone in that room would know exactly what kind of people my children had become, and exactly what kind of woman had raised them. The dining room fell into a hushed anticipation as I entered. Dozens of faces turned toward me, curiosity evident in their expressions. The long mahogany table had been set with exquisite care, crystal glasses catching the candlelight, fine china arranged in perfect symmetry, centerpieces of white roses and winter greenery running down the middle like a river of elegance. Laura quickly overtook me, slipping seamlessly into hostess mode as she directed guests to their seats. I noticed with a pang that stabbed deeper than I expected that there was no place card for me at the elaborately decorated table. Of course there wasn't. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't been expected. I hadn't been wanted. William caught my eye from across the room and gestured to an empty chair beside him. "Isabel, please join us. I'd be honored to have you sit here." As I took my seat, I could see my children huddled in an intense conversation by the kitchen door. Their furtive glances in my direction confirmed they were discussing how to handle the situation. How to handle me. How to contain the damage I'd already done to their carefully constructed facades. Laura appeared at my side before I'd even fully settled into my chair, her smile brittle as spun sugar. "Everyone," she announced, raising her champagne glass with practiced grace, "I'd like to propose a toast before we begin." She was trying to redirect attention to regain control of her event. I recognized the tactic. It was the same one she'd used as a teenager when caught in a lie. Create a distraction shift, the focus moved forward as if nothing had happened. To new partnerships, she continued her voice, carrying that professional warmth she'd perfected for client meetings, and prosperous futures. Glasses clinked around the table, but William kept his focus on me. The toast felt hollow, the sentiment empty. Around us, I could sense the undercurrent of whispers, the sideways glances, the barely contained curiosity about what had just transpired in the living room. As servers began bringing out the first course, some kind of delicate soup with microgreens and truffle oil, William leaned toward me, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "You never answered my earlier question, Isabel, about the literature program you developed, the Words of Change initiative." I set down my spoon, memories flooding back. We started it in 2008. Took students who were struggling behaviorally, academically, emotionally, and introduced them to authors who had overcome similar challenges. Maya Angelou for the kids dealing with trauma, Sherman Alexie for the Native American students who felt invisible, Ocean Vuong for the ones questioning their identity. It became a model program, William said loud enough now for others nearby to hear. "Adopted by 3 states. Your mother is too modest," he told the table, his voice carrying that same authority I'd heard earlier. "She transformed hundreds of lives through that work." I caught Brandon's eye across the room. He was watching the exchange with growing alarm, his jaw clenched tight. My quiet life teaching had never impressed my ambitious children. They'd always seemed embarrassed by my modest career, preferring to focus on their father's more lucrative business ventures, even after his death left us drowning in debt that I'd spent 5 years paying off penny by penny, sacrifice by sacrifice. "Mom was always dedicated to her students," Sophie offered from her seat near the kitchen, her tone conciliatory but her eyes red-rimmed and anxious. "We're very proud of her work." "Indeed." William's eyebrow arched slightly. "That's interesting, Sophie, because I'm surprised you never mentioned your mother's accomplishments to your business associates. Given the connections her reputation could have brought you in the education sector and nonprofit circles, in community development." The observation hung in the air like an indictment. Sophie's face flushed deep red, and she looked down at her untouched soup. The first course arrived at my place, an artfully arranged bowl of butternut squash soup garnished with pomegranate seeds and candied pecans. It probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. I picked up my spoon, trying to ignore the way my hand trembled slightly. A man further down the table, salt and pepper beard, expensive watch, the look of someone used to being listened to, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Morrison, I understand you're living more simply these days. Was that a deliberate lifestyle choice after retirement?" I could see Laura nearly choke on her wine. This was exactly the kind of conversation she'd been trying to avoid, the kind of scrutiny that would unravel her carefully crafted narrative. "Not exactly," I replied calmly, setting down my spoon. The truth felt surprisingly liberating on my tongue. After my husband died 5 years ago, he left us with significant medical debt. I sold our home to provide startup capital for my children's businesses. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. An uncomfortable silence rippled through the table like a stone dropped in still water. A woman I recognized as Jennifer Chen, I'd seen her byline in the business journal, leaned forward with interest. "So you're the angel investor behind Laura's Emporium Brandon's Savory Table and Sophie's design firm. That's quite impressive, Mrs. Morrison." "Mom's support was invaluable," Brandon said quickly, appearing at the table with forced casualness, a fresh glass of champagne in his hand. "Though of course we've built our successes through our own hard work and business acumen." "Of course," I agreed, my voice mild. "Though I'm curious about something, Brandon." He stiffened almost imperceptibly. "What's that, Mom?" "When you took that luxury vacation to the Maldives last spring, the one with the overwater bungalow and private chef that you posted about extensively on social media, was that before or after you told me you couldn't afford to help with my dental surgery?" The clink of dropped silverware echoed in the sudden silence. Brandon's face went pale, then flushed red. Jennifer Chen's eyebrows shot up, and I could practically see her mental notepad filling with notes. "Mom," Laura hissed from across the table, mortified. "This isn't the place." "Where is the place, Laura?" I asked, keeping my voice level and reasonable. "Your home? You haven't invited me here in over a year. Your office? Your assistant has explicit instructions to screen my calls. When exactly were we going to have this conversation?" The tension at the table was palpable now. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly very interested in their soup, in the flicker of candlelight, in anything but the family drama unfolding before them. "Perhaps we should change the subject," Sophie suggested desperately, her voice high and tight. "Excellent idea," I agreed. "Let's talk about the Westridge Legacy Award, the one with the $50,000 grant attached, the one you three intercepted and kept from me." The clatter of another dropped utensil, a knife this time, echoed through the dining room. All pretense of polite dinner conversation evaporated. This was no longer a party, it was a reckoning. "Is that true?" William's voice had hardened, his earlier warmth replaced by something sharper. He turned to my children with an expression that made all three of them flinch. "Did you intercept correspondence about your mother's award?" Laura recovered first, always the quickest to pivot in a crisis. "There was a miscommunication," she said smoothly, though her hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. "We were going to surprise Mom with it. We thought—" "On what date exactly were you planning this surprise?" I interrupted. "The award was announced 4 months ago, according to William. 4 months of me living in that garage room, working substitute teaching jobs, choosing between medication and groceries. When precisely were you going to spring this delightful surprise?" No one answered. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft Christmas music still playing somewhere in the house, a jarring contrast to the confrontation unfolding at the table. "Did you cash the check?" William asked, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. His voice carried the weight of professional interrogation, now not social curiosity. The guilty expressions on my children's faces answered his question more eloquently than words ever could. "I authorized my siblings to accept it on my behalf," Laura improvised quickly. "The funds are being held in a trust for Mom's retirement." "We were waiting for the right time to—" I laughed. The sound surprised even me, sharp and bitter, nothing like my usual soft chuckle. "A trust I've never heard of, while I've been working as a substitute teacher for $80 a day and living above a garage to make ends meet." A series of whispers ran around the table like wildfire. The story was becoming clear to everyone present, the picture forming with brutal clarity. My successful children with their boutique and restaurant and design firm, with their luxury cars and expensive clothes and lavish vacations, had taken advantage of their own mother, had stolen from her, had left her struggling while they flourished on money that came from her sacrifice. Brandon stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is a private family matter," he declared, his voice carrying that edge of righteous indignation he'd always used when backed into a corner. "I don't think it's appropriate dinner conversation." "I disagree," Jennifer Chen said, setting down her wine glass with deliberate care. "As someone who's written extensively about your business success stories, Mr. Morrison, I'm very interested in how your initial funding was acquired and how your investor has been compensated." Brandon's jaw worked, but no words came out. "Our mother was not an investor," Laura insisted, her professional demeanor cracking like ice over a thawing pond. She was helping her children the way any mother would. It was a gift. A gift, I repeated softly, tasting the word. Yes, that's what I thought too. Just as I thought any children would ensure their mother was taken care of after she gave them everything. Sophie burst into tears, her carefully applied makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. Mom, it wasn't like that, she sobbed. We just got caught up in everything. The businesses, the social circles, the pressure to appear successful. We didn't mean to... To what? I asked, my voice gentler now but no less firm. To forget about me, to ignore my calls, to spend my award money on yourselves. Which part didn't you mean to do, Sophie? And where did I fit into that picture? I continued looking at each of my children in turn. Was I an inconvenient reminder of where you came from? Something to be hidden away and forgotten? A liability to your carefully crafted images of success? The room had gone completely silent. Even the servers had retreated to the kitchen, sensing that this was not a moment to interrupt with the second course. William cleared his throat, breaking the tension. Isabel, regardless of what's happened here tonight, and there's clearly a great deal to unpack, the job offer still stands. We would be honored to have you lead our educational outreach program. Thank you, William, I said sincerely, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the soup I'd barely touched. I appreciate that more than you know. Laura's face had cycled through multiple emotions: embarrassment, anger, fear, before settling on something that looked like desperation. A job, she said, her voice small and confused. Mom, you don't need to work. We can take care of you. We should take care of you. The way you've been taking care of me for the past 18 months? I asked. No, thank you. I prefer to take care of myself. Brandon leaned forward, his voice low and urgent, abandoning his earlier defensiveness for what looked like genuine concern. Mom, please. You're embarrassing us in front of everyone. These are important people. Our reputations. I'm embarrassing you. The words came out louder than I intended, sharp with indignation. I've spent the last year and a half living in poverty while you three lived in luxury, using money that came from my sacrifice from the sale of the home your father and I built together. And you're worried about being embarrassed. A woman at the far end of the table, older perhaps, in her 70s, with kind eyes and elegant pearls, spoke up softly. Perhaps your children simply didn't understand how difficult things were for you, Isabel. Communication can be complicated in families. Sometimes we don't realize. I called each of them weekly. I said, appreciating her attempt at diplomacy but unwilling to let my children off the hook so easily. I told them about the leak in my ceiling that turned my room into a petri dish of mold. I told them about choosing between heating oil and food some months. I told them about the tooth I couldn't afford to fix the medication I was rationing, the humiliation of asking Mrs. Peterson to reduce my rent. I paused, making sure I had everyone's attention, making sure my children heard every word. Laura told me she was too busy to talk, always in Milan or Paris or some fashion show. Brandon suggested I should budget better, as if the problem was my spending rather than my income. And Sophie, I looked at my youngest daughter, still crying silently. Sophie promised to visit every single time. This weekend, Mom, I promise. But she never showed up. Not once in 18 months. Sophie's sobs intensified, her shoulders shaking. So please, I continued, looking back at the kind woman with the pearls, don't suggest this was a communication problem. This was a choice. They chose their comfort over my well-being. They chose their image over my reality. They chose to take and take and take, even after I had nothing left to give. The main course arrived in that heavy silence, servers moving like ghosts, setting down plates of herb-crusted lamb and roasted vegetables with hands that trembled slightly. No one seemed to notice the food. All eyes remained fixed on our corner of the table, where a family was falling apart in real time. Brandon, always the one who needed to control the narrative, made another attempt. You don't understand business, Mom. Those initial investments, your money, they were seed capital. High risk, high reward. We've been building something sustainable, something that would eventually what on? I interrupted, suddenly curious where he was going with this. Eventually benefit me. Eventually pay me back. Eventually acknowledge my existence. He faltered, and in that moment of hesitation I saw something flicker across his face. Something like fear. Your restaurant is failing, isn't it? The question came out more as a statement, the pieces clicking together as I spoke. That's why you couldn't help with the dental surgery. That's why you suggested I budget better, because you're barely keeping your own head above water. Brandon's face confirmed what I'd suspected. "It's a temporary cash flow issue," he said stiffly. "All restaurants go through—" "How much debt are you carrying?" I asked directly. "That's not—" "How much, Brandon?" His jaw clenched. "About 180,000. Gasps rippled around the table. Jennifer Chen was no longer even pretending not to take mental notes. "And you?" I turned to Laura. "Your boutique's revenue looks impressive on social media, but what about profit margins? What about overhead? That Mercedes, this house, the designer clothes, are they coming from actual business success or from maintaining an illusion?" Laura's silence was answer enough. "Sophie." I looked at my youngest. "How's the freelance design work really going? Steadily enough to afford that apartment in the Pearl District? Or are you using credit cards to bridge the gaps, hoping the next big client will come along?" Sophie couldn't even look at me, just shook her head slightly, tears still streaming. "So let me understand this," I said, my voice eerily calm. "All three of you took my money from selling the home your father and I built over 30 years and used it not just for business investments, but for lifestyles you couldn't afford. You bought cars and took vacations and wore designer clothes and lived in expensive places, all while telling me I needed to budget better. All while letting me live in a garage. We were going to help you," Laura said desperately. "Once the business is stabilized, once what? Once you'd squeezed every last drop from me, once I was completely broken." I shook my head. "No, you were comfortable with the arrangement. Out of sight, out of mind. As long as you didn't have to see me struggling, you could tell yourselves you were successful, that you'd made it, that you'd risen above your humble beginnings." I reached for the glass of water in front of me, my hand steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "I became the secret you kept, the poverty you escaped, the sacrifice you never acknowledged." "That's not fair," Brandon protested. "We love you, Mom. We've always loved you." "Love without respect isn't love," William observed quietly. "It's possession." The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. Around the table I could see heads nodding in agreement, could feel the shift in the room's energy. My children had lost their audience. Whatever sympathy they might have claimed had evaporated under the weight of truth. Just then, from the entrance hallway, a voice called out, "Hello, Laura." The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in. "I hope that's—" The voice stopped abruptly as its owner appeared in the dining room doorway. He was tall, perhaps 64, with silver hair, and the kind of elegant bearing that spoke of confidence earned through experience rather than purchased with money. He wore a well-tailored coat dusted with snow, and in his arms he carried a wrapped gift and a bouquet of winter flowers, white lilies and blue irises tied with a silver ribbon. When his eyes found mine across the crowded room, his face transformed with a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Isabel," he said softly, as if we were alone rather than surrounded by dozens of strangers. "It's been a long time." My breath caught. "Daniel, I didn't think you were coming back to town until next week." "Finished the project early." His smile widened. "I wanted to surprise you." The room had fallen silent again, but this time with a different quality curiosity rather than judgment, interest rather than shock. Laura found her voice first, moving toward the doorway with her hostess mask firmly back in place, though it sat awkwardly over her earlier distress. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Daniel extended his hand, his movements graceful and assured. "Daniel Ashford. Your mother and I were close once upon a time. We've recently reconnected." I watched my children's faces as they tried to process this new information. They had no idea I'd been in contact with anyone from my past, much less someone who clearly held me in high regard. I'd been so conditioned to their neglect that I'd stopped sharing anything about my life with them, stopped expecting them to care, stopped hoping they'd ask. "Mom," Brandon began cautiously, his earlier anger replaced by confusion. "You never mentioned—" "There's a lot I haven't mentioned," I replied evenly. "Just as there's a lot you haven't asked." Daniel surveyed the scene with perceptive eyes, the elaborate dinner party, the tense faces, the half-eaten food, and me sitting among strangers who seemed to know more about my achievements than my own children did. "I gather I've interrupted something important," he said carefully. "You have no idea," William said, standing to shake Daniel's hand. "William Harmon. I'm an old friend of Isabel's, though in a different capacity. You have excellent timing. Please join us. I think Isabel could use another ally at the table." As servers scrambled to add a place setting beside me, I felt Daniel's hand briefly touch my shoulder, a gesture of support, of solidarity. It was such a simple thing, but after months of isolation of being treated as invisible, it nearly undid me. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, settling into the chair beside me. "I'm better than I've been in a long time," I said, and realized it was true. Despite the confrontation, despite the pain of these revelations, I felt more alive, more present, more myself than I had in years. Daniel nodded, understanding passing between us without need for explanation. Then he turned to address the table, his voice carrying that same easy confidence I remembered from 4 decades ago. "I apologize for the dramatic entrance. I've come with some news for Isabel, news that might change quite a bit about her situation." All eyes turned to him, including my children's. They looked wary now, uncertain, as if the ground beneath their feet had turned to quicksand. "The investment opportunity I mentioned when we spoke last week, Isabel," Daniel continued. "The one I thought might take months to arrange. It's been approved. The funds are available immediately." My heart skipped. We'd discussed this only briefly, his company's interest in developing educational technology, his thought that my teaching methods might have commercial applications. But I'd assumed it was a polite conversation, not a serious proposition. "I don't understand," I said carefully. "I'm the managing partner of Ashford & Associates," Daniel explained to the table. "We specialize in educational technology and infrastructure development. Isabel shared some of her innovative teaching methods with me, particularly her work with diverse learners and adaptive curriculum design. We recognized their potential immediately." Brandon leaned forward, his business instincts momentarily overriding his emotional turmoil. "What kind of potential are we talking about?" Daniel turned to him with a cool, assessing look. "We're prepared to fund a complete educational platform based on your mother's work. Initial investment of $1.2 million with Isabel as lead developer and creative director. She would hold a 35% equity stake." The number hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. $1.2 million. More money than I had ever imagined having access to. More than enough to change everything. More than enough to never worry about heating oil or dental work or garage rooms ever again. My children stared at me, shock evident on their faces. The mother they had dismissed as financially naive, professionally irrelevant, and socially embarrassing was being offered a multi-million-dollar business opportunity. The woman they'd hidden away was suddenly valuable in ways they'd never imagined. "You never said anything about this," Sophie whispered, her voice small and lost. "No," I agreed. "I didn't, because somewhere along the way I learned that my achievements and opportunities weren't valued by the 3 people I valued most in the world. So I stopped sharing them." The realization of what they had lost, not just financially, but in terms of relationship and connection and trust, seemed to be dawning on my children's faces. But before they could respond, before they could offer excuses or apologies, or desperate attempts at reconciliation, Daniel dropped one more piece of information that would force them to question everything they thought they knew about their practical, predictable mother. "There's something else Isabel should know," he said, his eyes never leaving mine as he placed a small velvet box on the table beside my untouched lamb. "Something that might explain why I was so eager to fund her vision." The velvet box sat between us like a question that hadn't yet been asked. I stared at it, my heart hammering against my ribs in a way that made me feel 22 again instead of 62. The deep blue velvet was worn at the edges, as if it had been opened and closed many times over the years, as if someone had been unable to let it go. "Daniel," I whispered suddenly, very aware of the dozens of eyes watching us. "What are you doing?" His smile was gentle, tinged with something that looked like old regret and new hope. Something I should have done 40 years ago. Around the table I could feel the collective intake of breath, the leaning forward, the anticipation. Even my children had stopped their anxious fidgeting to watch. Laura's voice cut through the moment, sharp with suspicion, and something else, fear perhaps, that she was losing control of yet another narrative. "Mom, who exactly is this man to you?" I looked at my daughter, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. Not as the successful businesswoman she pretended to be, but as a woman who had lost her way somewhere between ambition and compassion, between success and humanity. "Daniel was my fiancé," I said quietly, "before I met your father." The silence that followed was profound. Brandon's mouth fell open slightly. Sophie's tears had stopped, replaced by wide-eyed shock. Laura's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked almost like betrayal. "Fiancé." Brandon's voice cracked slightly on the word. "You never mentioned being engaged before Dad." "There are many things I never mentioned." I replied, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. Many parts of myself I set aside to be your mother, but that doesn't mean those parts cease to exist. It just means I kept them quiet, kept them private, kept them safe from dismissal. The last word landed heavily. My children flinched. Daniel opened the velvet box with careful fingers, and I heard several gasps around the table. But it wasn't a ring inside, as everyone had expected. It was a small golden key, intricate and beautiful, resting on a bed of aged silk. "This isn't a proposal, Isabel," Daniel said, his voice carrying warmth and understanding. "Not yet, anyway, though I hope in time we might get there." His eyes twinkled with amusement at the collective gasp of anticipation that had rippled around the table, now releasing into confused curiosity. "This is the key to my lake house in Vermont," he continued, "the one where we were going to spend our honeymoon all those years ago. Do you remember?" I remembered it well. A stunning property nestled among pine trees with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking crystal waters. In our youthful plans, it had represented our future together, a place where we'd raise children, host summers, grow old. Before life had taken us in different directions, before I'd met Robert Morrison at a hospital fundraiser, before I'd fallen in love with his laugh and his kindness, before I'd chosen a different path. "I remember," I said softly. "The house is yours," Daniel said, pressing the key into my hand. His fingers were warm against my cold ones. "Whether or not you accept the business proposal, whether or not you accept anything else I might offer in the future, it's my way of saying I'm sorry for the years we lost." "You're giving our mother a house?" Sophie's voice was faint with shock. Daniel turned to her, and I watched his expression harden slightly, not cruel, but firm. "I'm returning something that was always meant to be hers, something that circumstances and perhaps my own foolish pride prevented her from having 40 years ago." He looked back at me, and in his eyes I saw decades of what-ifs and might-have-beens. "I never sold it, Isabel. I could never bring myself to let it go. Somehow I always hoped. Well, hope is a stubborn thing." I held the key, feeling its weight in my palm. It was more than just metal and possibility. It was a symbol of a life I'd never lived, of choices made and roads not taken. And now at 62, it was being offered back to me like a second chance. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything now," Daniel assured me. "The key and the decision are yours to keep." William cleared his throat, breaking the spell of the moment. "Well, Isabel, it seems your future is suddenly full of options. The teaching position, the award money, a business opportunity, and now a house. Quite a contrast to what your children had planned for you." His pointed comment cut through the sentimentality, bringing us back to the harsh reality that had been exposed tonight. My children had deliberately kept me small, dependent, and isolated, while I had always made sacrifices to give them every opportunity to grow, to flourish, to become their best selves. Brandon stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "Mom, you can't seriously be considering taking handouts from a man who abandoned you decades ago." Daniel's expression darkened. "I didn't abandon Isabel. She chose your father over me. A choice I respected, even though it broke my heart." He paused, his gaze sharp. "I stepped aside because I wanted her happiness above all else, something her own children seem incapable of doing." "That's not fair," Laura protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Daniel asked. "You've hidden her away, stolen her award money, intercepted her opportunities, and left her living in poverty while you spent her sacrifice on luxury cars and vacations. And now you're upset that someone is treating her with the respect and generosity she deserves." "We love our mother," Brandon insisted, but the words sounded hollow even to him, I could tell. "Love without respect isn't love," William repeated his earlier observation. "It's possession. It's control. And from what I've witnessed tonight, your mother has been possessed and controlled for far too long." I raised my hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Enough." My voice carried authority I hadn't known I still possessed. "Daniel, William, thank you both for your support and generosity. It means more than I can express." I turned to my children. "As for you three, I think we've said enough for tonight." "Mom, please don't leave like this," Laura said desperately, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered now. Mascara smudged beneath her eyes, her perfect hair coming loose from its pins, her hands twisting together anxiously. "Let us explain." Let us make this right. Explain what? I asked, suddenly very tired. How you justified taking advantage of my trust, how you convinced yourselves that keeping me dependent was somehow for my own good, or perhaps how you rationalized spending my award money on yourselves while I struggled to afford basic necessities. We made mistakes, Sophie admitted, her voice breaking. Terrible, horrible mistakes, but we're your children. Doesn't that count for something? It counted for everything. I corrected her gently but firmly. That's why I gave you everything I had. That's why I sold the house your father and I built together. That's why I moved into a garage room without complaint. That's why I kept calling even when you never answered. It counted for everything, Sophie. And that's exactly why this betrayal cuts so deep. Brandon made one last desperate attempt to regain control, to frame the narrative in a way that didn't make them look like the villains they'd become. You're being manipulated, Mom. This man shows up out of nowhere with promises of money and houses, and suddenly you're ready to turn your back on your own family. I'm not turning my back on anyone, I said steadily. I'm simply standing up for myself, something I should have done long ago. Daniel rose beside me, his presence solid and reassuring. Isabel, my car is outside if you'd like to leave. You don't have to stay here and endure this. I nodded, gratitude washing over me. The thought of escaping this tense atmosphere, of stepping out of this beautiful house that felt nothing like home, was overwhelmingly appealing. Wait, Laura said, her voice cracking with desperation. The family home. You said you found a way to buy it back. How? When? I hesitated, then decided that the truth, all of it, was the only path forward now. 6 months ago, I started tutoring the grandson of the couple who bought our house. Thomas Chen. He was struggling with reading comprehension, much like William's son had. When his grandparents mentioned they were planning to sell and downsize, I asked if they would consider selling it back to me. But how could you afford it? Brandon asked, genuine confusion in his voice. On your income. I couldn't, I admitted. Not alone, but Mrs. Eleanor Peterson could. The name hung in the air. Your landlord, Sophie whispered. My friend, I corrected. Her late husband left her quite well off, and she's been looking for investment properties. We made an arrangement. She provided the funds, and I'll pay her back over time from my teacher's pension and the income from my new position at Westridge. I watched understanding dawn on their faces. While they'd been dismissing me as helpless and dependent, I'd been making plans, building relationships, creating options. While they'd assumed I was passive and resigned, I'd been fighting for my future. You did all that without telling us? Laura asked, something like hurt in her voice. Yes, I said simply, Ed. Just as you made decisions about my life and my future without telling me. Just as you intercepted my award and told people I was traveling abroad. Just as you spent money that should have been invested in your businesses on maintaining lifestyles you couldn't afford. We all have our secrets, it seems. A heavy silence fell over the dining room. Around us, the other guests sat frozen witnesses to a family falling apart, and perhaps, just perhaps, beginning to rebuild on more honest foundations. Jennifer Chen, the business reporter, set down her fork with careful deliberation. She'd been silent through most of the meal, but her sharp eyes had been taking in everything. Ms. Morrison, Isabel, may I ask you something? I turned to her, curious. Of course. You gave each of your children $150,000 from the sale of your home. That's $450,000 total. The house your husband left was paid off, but you mentioned medical debt. How much did you have left after paying that off and giving them their share? I appreciated her directness, her willingness to ask the question everyone was clearly wondering. Nothing, I said simply. The house sold for $480,000. After paying off $30,000 in medical debt and closing costs, I had exactly $450,000 left. I gave it all to them. You kept nothing for yourself. An older gentleman across the table looked shocked. I kept the promise I'd made to my husband, I said, that I would make sure our children had every opportunity to succeed, that they would never have to struggle the way we did when we first started out. And what did they promise you in return? Jennifer asked. The question hung there, sharp and pointed. Laura opened her mouth, but no words came out. Brandon looked down at his hands. Sophie's tears started again, silent and constant. They promised we would always take care of each other, I said quietly. They promised I would always have a place with them. They promised my sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. But it was, William observed. Not just forgotten, erased. I nodded slowly. I think somewhere along the way my children confused supporting them with erasing myself. I became so focused on being what they needed that I forgot to show them who I was. I taught them to take, but I never taught them when to give back. I modeled sacrifice, but I never modeled boundaries. Daniel's hand found mine under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. The simple gesture of support nearly undid me. So in a way, I continued, my voice stronger now, this is partially my fault. I enabled them. I allowed them to believe that my needs didn't matter, that my life was secondary to theirs, that I would always be there to prop them up, no matter how little they gave in return. That doesn't excuse what they did, William said firmly. No, I agreed. It doesn't, but it helps me understand how we got here. And more importantly, it helps me know what needs to change going forward. I stood slowly, Daniel rising beside me. Around the table, every eye was fixed on us. Tomorrow, I said, addressing the room, but speaking primarily to my children. I'm calling William to accept the position at Westridge. I'm claiming my award money, all of it, with whatever legal remedies are necessary to recover what was taken. I'm accepting Daniel's business partnership, and I'm moving to the Vermont Lake House. Laura stood as well, her face pale. Mom, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can... Fix what exactly? I asked. You can't fix the past 18 months. You can't undo the hurt, the loneliness, the nights I went to bed hungry, the times I couldn't afford medication, the humiliation of being shut out of my own children's lives. We didn't know it was that bad, Brandon tried. Yes, you did, I said, my voice hard now. I told you, repeatedly. You just didn't want to know. There's a difference. Sophie stood, stumbling slightly, her face blotchy with tears. What about us? What about your family? I looked at my 3 children, these adults I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for. I saw them clearly now, perhaps for the first time, flawed, selfish, lost, but still mine. Still the babies I'd carried and nursed, the toddlers I'd taught to walk, the teenagers I'd guided through heartbreaks and triumphs. That depends on you, I said, my voice softer now. On whether you can learn to see me as a whole person, not just your mother. On whether you're willing to build a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation or control. On whether you can understand that taking care of each other means actually caring about each other's well-being, not just using each other for what we can provide. I paused, letting the words sink in. I'm not cutting you out of my life, I continued, but I'm not going to be invisible anymore either. I'm not going to be convenient anymore. I'm not going to sacrifice my well-being for your comfort. If you want a relationship with me, it will be on new terms. Equal terms. What does that mean? Laura asked, her voice small. It means you show up, I said simply. Not when you need something, not when it's convenient, but because you genuinely want to know how I am, what I'm doing, who I'm becoming in this new chapter of my life. It means you listen when I talk, instead of waiting for your turn to speak. It means you respect my choices, even when they don't benefit you. I picked up the small wrapped package I'd brought, the one containing a copy of the deed to our family home, and held it for a moment. This was going to be your Christmas gift, I said. The deed to the house where you grew up. I was going to sign it over to the 3 of you to show you that despite the distance between us, you were still my priority. You still mattered most. I set it back down on the table carefully. Now I'm not sure what I'll do with it. Maybe I'll keep it as my own home. Maybe I'll sell it and use the funds for my new business venture. Maybe I'll turn it into a scholarship house for students who need a place to stay. I don't know yet. But for the first time in 3 years, the decision will be mine alone. Daniel offered me his arm, and I took it gratefully. My legs felt shaky, my body exhausted from the emotional expenditure of the evening, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years, freer, more authentically mine. As we turned toward the door, William stood as well. Isabel, wait just a moment. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a large envelope. The paperwork for the Westridge Legacy Award. Everything you need to claim what's rightfully yours. I took the liberty of having our lawyers draw it up this afternoon after I confirmed you'd be at this party. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. $50,000. Recognition for a lifetime of work. Validation that I had mattered, that I had made a difference. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. No, William said firmly. Thank you. For every student you helped, every life you changed, every family you gave hope to. You earned this 1,000 times over. I tucked the envelope into my bag, feeling its presence like a promise. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would begin reclaiming my life. But first, I had to walk out of this house, out of this role I'd been playing, out of this small, convenient version of myself that had fit so neatly into my children's peripheral vision. Isabel. Laura's voice stopped me at the doorway. I turned to see her standing alone. Brandon had disappeared toward the kitchen. Sophie had collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. Can you ever forgive us? The question hung in the air, weighted with decades of history and the painful revelations of the night. Forgiveness isn't a gift I can give you tonight, Laura, I said finally honestly. It's a journey we would have to take together. The question is, are you willing to walk that path with me? Not as the children who need me, or the successful adults who've outgrown me, but as people who value who I truly am. Laura's face crumpled slightly, but she nodded. I want to try. Then try, I said simply. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts. Try by showing up. Try by listening. Try by being honest about your own struggles instead of pretending you have it all figured out. Try by being my daughter, not my manager or my judge. With that question lingering in the air, a question that would shape the future of our family, for better or worse, I took Daniel's arm and walked out of Laura's mansion into the snowy Christmas night. The cold air hit my face like a blessing, sharp and clean and real. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of voices resuming inside the party, attempting to continue despite the wreckage of what had unfolded. Tomorrow there would be phone calls and conversations and consequences. Jennifer Chen would write her article. Word would spread through their social circles. My children would have to face the reality they'd created. But tonight I just needed to breathe. Daniel's car was warm, a luxury sedan that spoke of success earned through decades of hard work. As he started the engine, soft jazz began to play from the speakers Miles Davis. I thought though I'd lost track of music over the years, lost track of so many things I'd once loved. Where would you like to go? Daniel asked gently. I thought about the garage room, cold and small and temporary. I thought about Mrs. Peterson, who would be waiting up despite the late hour, who would want to know how it had gone. I thought about the Vermont house I hadn't yet seen the key burning a hole in my pocket. Could we just drive for a while? I asked. I'm not ready to go back yet. Not ready to be still. Of course. He pulled out of the driveway and we drove through the quiet streets of the city, past houses lit with Christmas lights, past families visible through windows, past lives that looked perfect from the outside. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, Daniel spoke. You were remarkable tonight. I laughed, the sound surprising me. I was terrified. You didn't show it. He glanced at me, warmth in his eyes. You stood there and spoke your truth, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. That takes incredible courage. Or incredible desperation, I said ruefully. Sometimes those are the same thing. He turned down a tree-lined street. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. I always have been, but tonight especially. His words touched something deep inside me, something that had been starving for recognition, for acknowledgement, for someone to see me as I truly was. Tell me about the lake house, I said, changing the subject before I started crying. Is it the same as I remember? Daniel's face lit up. Better. I've renovated over the years, updated the kitchen, added a master suite with windows overlooking the lake, installed a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I always thought, well, I always hoped you might see it someday. You really never sold it. Never could bring myself to. He shook his head. Every woman I dated asked about it. Every real estate agent told me it was a valuable asset just sitting there. But I couldn't let it go. It was the last piece of the future we'd planned together. Letting it go would have been like saying that future never mattered. It mattered, I said softly. It mattered very much. I loved you, Daniel. Truly. I know. His hand found mine on the console between us. And you loved Robert too. Love isn't finite, Isabel. Loving him didn't erase what we had. It just meant you had two different possible futures, and you chose the one that felt right at the time. Do you regret it? I asked. The time we lost. He was quiet for a long moment, navigating a turn before answering. I regret the years we didn't know each other, but I don't regret the lives we lived. I had a good marriage. Margaret was wonderful, and I loved her deeply. We had 35 happy years before the cancer took her. You had your marriage with Robert, raised 3 children. Flawed as they are, they're still yours. We lived the lives we were meant to live. And now, he said, squeezing my hand gently, we have the chance to write a new chapter, not to replace what we've lost or lived, but to add something new, something unexpected, something chosen freely rather than from youthful passion or circumstances. We drove in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the city give way to suburbs give way to open spaces. Snow fell gently, coating everything in white silence. The business proposal, I said eventually. Is it really viable, or were you being kind? Daniel laughed. Isabel, I don't invest $1.2 million out of kindness. Your teaching methods, the way you adapt curriculum for different learning styles, the way you build confidence while teaching content, the integrated approach to emotional and academic development, it's genuinely revolutionary. We've shown your work to education consultants, neuroscientists, curriculum developers. Everyone agrees it has massive potential. I'm 62 years old, I pointed out, not exactly prime startup age. You're 62 years young, he corrected. With 25 years of field experience, proven methods, and the wisdom that comes from actually doing the work rather than theorizing about it. You're exactly the right age for this. And besides, he added with a smile, some of the most successful entrepreneurs started after 60. Colonel Sanders was 62 when he franchised KFC. I found myself smiling despite everything. Are you comparing my teaching methods to fried chicken? Both are American treasures that deserve to be shared with the world, he said solemnly, then grinned. Too much. Way too much. But I was laughing now, really laughing, and it felt like oxygen after years of holding my breath. Eventually, Daniel drove me back to Mrs. Peterson's house. The garage apartment's single light glowed like a beacon, and I could see Mrs. Peterson's kitchen window still lit despite the late hour. She waited up for you, Daniel observed. She always does. I felt a surge of affection for the woman who'd given me not just shelter, but friendship when my own children had abandoned me. Daniel walked me to the door, our breath forming clouds in the cold air. At the bottom of the stairs that led to my small room, he paused. Isabel, I meant what I said. About all of it. The house is yours. The business opportunity is real. And He paused, choosing his words carefully. I'm not trying to rush you or pressure you, but I want you to know that I'm here. For whatever you need, whatever you're ready for, at whatever pace feels right. I looked at this man who'd waited 40 years, who'd kept a house he couldn't let go of, who'd built a business proposal around my work, who'd shown up tonight at exactly the right moment. Thank you, I said simply, for seeing me, for believing in me, for... I trailed off, overwhelmed by too many emotions to name. No thanks needed. He leaned forward and kissed my forehead gently, the gesture tender and respectful. Call me tomorrow after you've talked to William. We'll start planning the next phase of your life. As I climbed the stairs to my small room, I heard Mrs. Peterson's door open below. Isabel, is that you, dear? It's me, Eleanor. Come down for tea, she called up. I want to hear everything. And so I did. I spent the next hour in Mrs. Peterson's warm kitchen drinking chamomile tea and telling her everything that had happened. She listened without judgment, asked clarifying questions, and when I finally finished, she sat back with a satisfied nod. About time, she said firmly. I've been waiting for you to stand up for yourself for months now. You knew? I asked, surprised. Of course I knew. I'm old, not blind. She refilled my cup. I've seen how they treat you, how they ignore your calls, how they never visit. It made me furious, but it wasn't my place to say anything. You had to come to it yourself. I almost didn't, I admitted. I almost turned around and left when Laura tried to shut the door on me. But you didn't. You walked in anyway. That took guts. Or stupidity. Sometimes those are the same thing, too. She smiled. So what happens now? Now I accept William's job offer. I claim my award money with legal help if necessary. I start working with Daniel on the education platform. And I move to Vermont. Mrs. Peterson's face fell slightly. Vermont, you're leaving Portland. Not forever, I assured her. The business will require me to travel, and I'll need to come back for meetings at Westridge Consultation's follow-ups. But I need some distance from all of this, some space to remember who I am when I'm not trying to be what everyone else needs. She nodded, understanding. And the house your family home? I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to keep it to prove to myself that I can stand on my own. Part of me wants to let it go to release that last tie to the past. I cradled the warm mug in my hands. I have time to decide. What about your children? The question I'd been avoiding. I don't know, Eleanor. I truly don't. I love them. I'll always love them. But I can't go back to being invisible. I can't go back to sacrificing myself so completely that there's nothing left. Good. She reached across the table and took my hand. Because you're worth more than that. You always have been. That night alone in my small room, I lay awake for hours. Through the thin walls, I could hear the sounds of the house settling of wind rustling through trees, of the distant hum of traffic. Normal sounds. Peaceful sounds. My phone buzzed repeatedly texts from my children, each one more desperate than the last. I didn't read them. Not yet. Tomorrow, perhaps. Or the day after. When I was ready. When I had the emotional strength to navigate whatever came next. Instead, I took out the velvet box Daniel had given me and opened it again. The key gleamed in the dim light from my bedside lamp. A key to a house I'd never seen, to a future I'd never imagined, to possibilities I was only beginning to glimpse. I thought about the past 3 years, the sacrifice, the loneliness, the slow erasure of self. I thought about tonight, the confrontation, the revelations, the reclaiming of voice and agency. And I thought about tomorrow, about William's job, about Daniel's proposal, about the Vermont house waiting like a promise. Somewhere in the house below, a clock chimed midnight. Christmas Day had arrived. Not the Christmas I'd imagined when I'd wrapped that gift and walked through the snow to Laura's door, but perhaps the Christmas I'd needed. The one that had finally forced everything into the light. I set the key on my nightstand where I could see it and closed my eyes. Tomorrow I would call William. Tomorrow I would start planning my new life. Tomorrow I would begin the complicated work of figuring out what relationship, if any, I would have with my children going forward. But tonight, I would sleep. Not the fitful, anxious sleep I'd grown used to, but deep, peaceful sleep that comes from finally telling the truth. From finally standing up. From finally remembering that I was not just a mother, not just a sacrifice, not just a convenience. I was Isabel Morrison, teacher, educator, innovator, friend. And now perhaps something more. I was the author of my own story, and I was still writing,